My wife's family made fun of me for being just a builder until I revealed my net worth, and the room went completely silent. I'm Alex, a 32-year-old man, and I've been married to my wife, Sophie, for 3 years. Our relationship has always been solid, but from the very start, I knew her family saw me as an outsider. They come from old money, the type of people who care about Ivy League degrees, country clubs, and corporate prestige. I, on the other hand, built my own business from the ground up. Financially, I've done well for myself, but to them, I was always the guy who didn't belong. The first time I met Sophie's parents, I could tell they had expected someone different. Her father, Richard, shook my hand like he was testing me, and her mother, Eleanor, gave me a polite but distant smile. They asked me about my background, and the second they realized I didn't come from wealth, their enthusiasm faded. Sophie later told me they had always hoped she'd end up with someone from their social circle, someone with an Ivy League education, a high-powered job in finance or law, and family connections that mattered. Over the years, I got used to their passive-aggressive comments, little remarks here and there about my humble roots or how lucky I was to have married into their family. At first, Sophie defended me, shutting them down whenever they overstepped, but her family would always brush it off as just jokes. Her older brother, Nathan, was the worst. An investment banker with an inflated ego, he never passed up a chance to undermine what I did for a living. I run my own business, something I built with years of hard work. It's successful, but because it's not a high-profile corporate job, they don't see it as real work. Every family gathering, the same routine played out. Nathan or Richard would make some offhand comment about the unpredictability of small businesses or joke that I must feel relieved to have married into money. Sophie would give me an apologetic look, and I'd bite my tongue, knowing that any pushback would just cause drama. Then came the dinner that changed everything. Sophie's parents invited us to an upscale restaurant, the kind of place where the menu doesn't have prices. On the way there, Sophie gave me a warning. Her father was in a bad mood, and she suggested I ignore any rude comments. I knew what that meant, another night of them looking down on me while pretending it was all in good fun. The moment we arrived, I could tell the night was going to be a long one. They had arranged the seating so that Sophie and I weren't next to each other. Instead, I was placed beside one of her younger cousins, who immediately started asking condescending questions about my work. Then Richard made his usual joke, something about how I must be relieved to have financial stability now that I was part of their family. Nathan laughed, shaking his head like it was all so amusing. He leaned back in his chair and, in that smug voice of his, said that running a business wasn't the same as having a real career. He made a show of explaining how people like him had to answer to executives and shareholders, implying that my success was just luck. I glanced at Sophie. She looked uncomfortable but didn't say anything, not right away. She was always careful not to escalate things with her family. That was the moment I decided I was done biting my tongue. I leaned forward, locking eyes with Richard. I wasn't going to say anything, but since you brought it up, let's talk about money. The room went silent. You could hear the sound of glasses being placed down on the table. Richard's expression shifted ever so slightly, a flicker of uncertainty. Sophie gripped my arm. Not in an aggressive way, but like she was trying to gauge where I was going with this. Eleanor straightened in her seat, her usual polite smile now frozen. I took my time, letting the tension settle before I continued. You talk about financial stability like I needed Sophie to support me, but let's be honest, who do you think has more money sitting in their account right now? Because I know exactly where I stand. Nathan scoffed, but I could see the hesitation in his eyes. Richard's fingers tightened around his wineglass. You work in finance, Nathan, I said, turning toward him. You love numbers, so let's do some numbers. My company? It pulled in over 7 figures last year. No bosses, no executives, just me, making decisions that actually pay off. And unlike the firms you work for, I don't have to worry about getting laid off if the market shifts. Nathan's smirk disappeared. Richard's jaw tightened. They weren't expecting this. I leaned back, letting the weight of my words sink in. So, if we're talking about money, let's be real. I didn't marry into stability. Sophie and I are partners. If anything, she's the one who benefits from what I bring to the table. Eleanor cleared her throat, trying to regain control of the conversation. Alex, dear, we never meant... I didn't let her finish. I know exactly what you meant. Every dinner, every comment, it's the same thing. You don't respect what I do because it's not the kind of career you wanted for your daughter. But at the end of the day, it's not your approval that matters. I looked at Sophie then. She wasn't just sitting there anymore. She was nodding, her expression shifting into something I hadn't seen before at these dinners. She wasn't just tolerating the conversation, she was backing me up. Richard cleared his throat, reaching for his glass like he needed a second to think. Nathan looked like he wanted to argue but didn't know what to say. The whole table felt different now, and for the first time in years, I wasn't the one feeling out of place. They were. The moment the words left my mouth, the energy at the table shifted. There was no more laughter, no more smug remarks, just silence, the kind that stretches uncomfortably, where everyone is waiting for someone else to speak first. Richard set his wine glass down carefully, his expression unreadable. Eleanor's polite smile twitched at the corners. Nathan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, eyes narrowed, like he was trying to figure out if I was bluffing. I let them sit with it for a few seconds before continuing. I wasn't going to gloat, but I wasn't backing down either. I explained that I had been running my business for 6 years, steadily growing it until it was now pulling in multi-million-dollar revenue annually. Not just once, not just a lucky streak. Consistent numbers year after year. Someone at the other end of the table exhaled sharply. A cousin, maybe. I could hear whispers. Nathan was the first to react. His scoff cut through the silence. "But what do you actually have in assets?" His tone was sharp, dismissive, like he was trying to salvage what little ground he had left. I met his gaze without hesitation. Fully paid off properties, a diverse stock portfolio, no debt, more than enough liquidity to retire tomorrow if I wanted to. I didn't need to check to know that Sophie's mother had stiffened. I could feel the change in her posture from across the table. Richard, meanwhile, had gone quiet. That was how I knew the information had hit harder than he was willing to admit. Nathan, though, wasn't done. "Anyone can make money for a few years," he muttered. "It's about long-term sustainability." I shrugged. "Funny, considering my portfolio has outperformed yours consistently for the past 5 years that shut him up." He blinked at me, his jaw tightening. He knew I had access to financial reports, public information for someone in his position. If I was saying I had outperformed him, then I had checked the numbers. I wasn't guessing. Eleanor cleared her throat, trying to regain control of the conversation. "Well, dear, we've never been the type to judge people by their bank accounts." It was such a blatant lie that I didn't even bother responding. Instead, I leaned back in my chair, waiting. Sure enough, realization dawned on them a moment later. The years of condescending comments, the constant implication that I was lucky to have married Sophie, all of it had been built on the assumption that I was beneath them financially. And now, they couldn't take any of it back. The final blow came when I mentioned casually, like an afterthought, that one of my business ventures had indirectly contracted Richard's firm in the past, meaning he had, at some point, profited off my work without even knowing it. The whispers at the table grew louder. A younger cousin covered his mouth, clearly amused. Someone else stifled a laugh. Richard's fingers curled around his fork. He was still holding on to the hope of regaining control, but there was nothing left to say. No witty remark, no dismissive joke. The entire table had just watched the balance of power shift. While they wouldn't acknowledge it openly, the atmosphere had changed. The whispers wouldn't stop overnight, but the seed of doubt in their social hierarchy had been planted. Sophie had been quiet through most of it, but when I glanced at her, she wasn't uncomfortable anymore. She wasn't trying to diffuse the situation or change the subject. Instead, she was watching her father carefully, waiting to see what he would do next. He tried to move on, brought up a completely unrelated topic, something about a recent trip they had taken. Nobody followed his lead. The dinner limped along after that, but the mood had soured. Eleanor started acting overly sweet to me, throwing in exaggerated compliments, like that would erase years of condescension. Nathan stayed silent, his ego clearly still recovering. When Sophie gave me a subtle nod, I knew it was time to go. We stood, and as I shook Richard's hand, I met his gaze one last time. Next time, maybe get to know someone before assuming you're better than them. His grip tightened slightly before letting go. No response, just a tight-lipped nod. We walked out, leaving them to sit in their own discomfort. The fallout started before we even got home. Sophie's phone vibrated on the car ride back, messages flooding in, the family group chat blowing up. Some cousins found the whole thing hilarious, sending crying, laughing emojis. Others, mostly the older generation, weren't amused. Richard's message came in first. Passive-aggressive, of course. Something about insecurity and showing off. I didn't hesitate before responding, just correcting the record. I'm done being disrespected. Nathan, interestingly, stayed silent. No snide remarks, no attempts to reclaim lost ground. He had gone from the loudest in the room to completely absent from the conversation. Sophie's aunt, one I had barely spoken to before, sent a private message. She admitted she had always found Richard insufferable and enjoyed watching him get taken down a notch. Then came the expected call from Eleanor. She didn't message me, she went straight to Sophie. The same tone she always used when trying to manipulate her daughter, soft, disappointed, as if Sophie had done something wrong. She claimed the whole thing had been blown out of proportion, that I had taken things too personally. I made my stance clear: I'm not dealing with this anymore. Sophie hesitated, but in the end, she agreed. She told her father that if he wanted a relationship with her, he needed to respect her husband. No more snide remarks, no more looking down on me. His response was exactly what I expected: an ultimatum: get your husband in check, or don't expect this family to welcome him. Sophie didn't even hesitate this time. Then I guess we won't be coming around. The family split into factions after that. Some took Richard's side. Others, especially the younger generation, openly sided with us. One of Sophie's younger cousins even reached out privately. "I misjudged you," was all they said. Days passed. The dust didn't settle. Then, out of nowhere, an invitation came in. Another family gathering. Clearly an attempt to smooth things over, to put me back in my place. I made my decision before Sophie even asked. Unless they actually change, I don't see the point. And for the first time, she didn't argue. The car ride home was quiet. Sophie stared out the window, her fingers tapping lightly against her leg. Every so often she glanced at me, like she wanted to say something but wasn't sure how to start. Eventually she spoke, admitting she was relieved I had finally stood up for myself, but she also knew her family well enough to predict their next move. They weren't the type to let things go. Her phone vibrated then, again and again. The family group chat had exploded. The first messages came from the younger cousins, short reactions, mostly laughing emojis and messages like, "That was legendary" or "Best dinner ever." Then came the more serious ones. Sophie's mother sent a long message about how I had created unnecessary tension. Richard's was more direct, calling me insecure and accusing me of showing off. I took Sophie's phone and typed out a response before she could overthink it, just correcting the record. "I'm done being disrespected." Then I handed the phone back to her. Nathan was noticeably absent from the conversation. The same person who had spent years making snide comments about me had nothing to say now. No weak comeback, no attempt to regain control of the narrative. He had been humiliated in front of the entire family, and for the first time he had nothing to fall back on. Then, out of nowhere, a private message came in from Sophie's aunt. She had always been on the quieter side during family gatherings, never outright rude, but never going out of her way to be friendly either. Her message was short and to the point. "Honestly, I've been waiting for someone to put Richard in his place for years. Well done." Sophie barely had time to process that before her mother called. She didn't waste any time getting to the point. She started with the usual, acting like none of the past conversations had ever happened, pretending I had completely misread the situation. She insisted that Richard's remarks had never been meant to hurt me, that I had taken everything too personally. Sophie put the call on speaker. I let her talk, let her go through the usual script of rewriting history, downplaying the years of condescension, making it seem like I was the unreasonable one. When she finally stopped, I answered for Sophie. "I'm not dealing with this anymore." There was a pause, a shift in tone. Eleanor dropped the fake niceties. "If you keep creating division, this family is going to have problems." And there it was, the first real attempt at control. Sophie didn't flinch. "Then I guess we're going to have problems." The call ended shortly after that. No resolution, no fake pleasantries, just a quiet understanding that things weren't going back to how they used to be. The next message came from Richard, another attempt to reassert dominance. This time, it wasn't directed at me, it was aimed at Sophie. "If you want to keep the peace in this family, get your husband in check." I barely had time to read it before Sophie fired back. "If you want to keep a relationship with me, learn to respect my husband." Another long pause in the chat. Then the family division started. Some relatives jumped in immediately, siding with Richard, insisting that I had been out of line and that Sophie was being disrespectful for standing by me. Others, mostly the younger generation, openly defended us. One of Sophie's younger cousins even messaged me directly. "I misjudged you," was all they wrote. Days passed. The dust didn't settle. Then, out of nowhere, Sophie's mother extended an invitation to another family gathering. It wasn't phrased as an apology or an attempt to fix things, just a simple, "We're all getting together next weekend. You're both welcome to come." It was obvious what they were trying to do. They weren't sorry, they weren't acknowledging anything, they just wanted to pull us back in, to make us fall in line. I didn't even have to think about my response. Unless they actually change, I don't see the point. Sophie nodded. She didn't argue. And for the first time since marrying into this family, I knew things were never going back to how they used to be. A few days after the dinner, Sophie's mother called. Her voice was softer than usual, the same tone she used when trying to smooth things over without actually apologizing. She insisted that the family had never meant to be disrespectful, and that everything had been a misunderstanding. According to her, they had always appreciated my hard work, they just hadn't realized the full extent of my success. It was obvious what was happening. Now that they knew I wasn't just some middle-class nobody, they wanted to rewrite history. Suddenly, all the passive-aggressive comments, the condescending remarks, the outright dismissals, they were all just misconceptions. I didn't bother arguing. I let her talk, let her spin her version of events. When she finally paused, Sophie simply said, "We're busy," and ended the call. Meanwhile, Richard was taking a different approach. He wasn't trying to make peace. He was fuming. Sophie's cousin sent her screenshots from a private family chat. Messages from Richard complaining that I had shown off like a common salesman and humiliated him in front of his family. Nathan had jumped in, agreeing that I had lucked into money and didn't have the sophistication of old wealth. Then Nathan took it a step further. He posted a vague social media post about how real money is old money and how some people think wealth equals class. While he didn't name names, a few family members commented, clearly drawing connections to our earlier confrontation. The more they fumed about it, the more obvious it was that they were struggling to accept the truth. Then came the next move. Sophie's parents invited us to an exclusive charity gala, one of those high society events where attendance was just as much about status as it was about philanthropy. The message was clear. This was their attempt at a reset, a chance to publicly align themselves with me now that they understood my financial standing. Sophie didn't want to go. She knew her parents too well. But she also knew that if we didn't show up, they'd spin the story to make it seem like we were avoiding them because we were the ones being unreasonable. In the end, I agreed. Not to impress them, but to make sure they understood that they couldn't control the narrative anymore. The moment we arrived, the shift in behavior was obvious. The same family that had spent years dismissing me was now treating me like an asset. Richard introduced me to his business associates, calling me a brilliant entrepreneur. Eleanor spoke about my accomplishments like she had always been proud of me. Even Nathan forced a tight smile and a handshake, though his eyes told a different story. It didn't take long for Richard to slip back into his old habits. At one point, he clapped me on the shoulder, his voice just loud enough for others to hear. "You'll fit in if you keep this up." It was the same patronizing tone he had always used, like I was still earning my place, still proving myself worthy of standing in their world. I didn't take the bait. Instead, I let a small pause settle between us before casually mentioning that I was in talks to acquire a business, one that happened to directly compete with one of his closest associates. I didn't phrase it as a threat, just a fact. The reaction was instant. Eleanor quickly changed the subject, a nervous flicker crossing her face. Richard's posture stiffened just slightly before he recovered, his expression neutral but his jaw tight. Nathan, however, wasn't as composed. He scoffed, muttering something about how business owners get lucky breaks. The jealousy was practically radiating off him. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The more he tried to tear me down, the more obvious it became that he was the one struggling with his own place in the family hierarchy now. As we left, I shook Richard's hand. It's interesting how things change when the right people start paying attention. His forced smile barely held. He knew exactly what I meant. A week after the gala, Sophie's parents reached out again. This time, the message was different. Instead of their usual passive-aggressive comments or thinly veiled superiority, they spoke about moving forward as a family. Richard even used the phrase starting fresh. It was an obvious shift in tone, too sudden, too deliberate. Sophie didn't trust it, and neither did I. There was no way they had changed overnight. They had spent years treating me like I didn't belong, then weeks scrambling after realizing they had underestimated me. Now, all of a sudden, they wanted to embrace me as family. It wasn't an apology, it was a strategy. Then came the next move. Nathan invited me to a golf event with his friends. No explanation, no fake pleasantries, just a direct invitation. It didn't take much to figure out what was happening. Nathan had never shown any interest in spending time with me before, but now that his family saw me as someone with financial influence, he wanted me in his circle. Maybe he thought I could introduce him to useful connections. Maybe he was trying to secure his own footing after the humiliation at dinner. Either way, I declined. That same evening, Richard called Sophie. He didn't ask about the golf event. He didn't even mention it. Instead, he told her that family support goes both ways, and that if I truly wanted to be part of the family, I should consider integrating into their world. It was worded carefully, but the meaning was clear. This wasn't about family, it was about control. In his mind, being accepted by them meant playing by their rules. A few days later, the real reason behind their sudden change in attitude became clear. A mutual acquaintance mentioned offhandedly that Richard's company had taken a hit due to market downturns and poor investment choices. While they still had wealth, liquidity had become an issue, and they were scrambling to maintain their usual lavish lifestyle without selling off major assets. I didn't even have to ask how long this had been going on. The timing made sense. They found out about my financial success, and suddenly, they were eager to mend fences. Sophie's mother wasn't subtle about it either. She had never shown any real interest in my work before, but now she was suddenly asking pointed questions about my business, casual at first, asking about my expansion plans, how I handled investments, whether I had considered partnerships. It was so painfully obvious that even Sophie picked up on it immediately. Then Sophie's cousin, the one who had been sending her family chat screenshots, messaged again. Apparently, Richard had started limiting discussions to a tighter group after suspecting a leak, but the cousin still had access to enough information to know things were spiraling. This time, it was even more revealing. According to them, Richard and Eleanor had already started discussing alternative financial solutions behind closed doors. They hadn't outright admitted they were struggling, but it was clear they were preparing for the possibility of needing outside help. And based on their recent behavior, it was obvious who they had in mind. Sophie didn't say much when she read the message. She didn't have to. For years, she had told herself that her parents' behavior was just a result of their upbringing, that they didn't mean harm. But now, she was seeing the truth. This wasn't about acceptance, it was about leverage. They didn't respect me, and they never would. But they did respect my money. Then came the final move. Richard and Eleanor invited us to dinner. Nothing fancy this time, just a private meal at their house, framed as a discussion about family unity. We went, not because we believed them, but because we wanted to see just how far they would take it. The moment we sat down, Richard steered the conversation toward business. He spoke about market volatility, the importance of making smart financial moves, the benefits of investing in family stability. He took his time, making it sound as casual as possible, but the message was crystal clear. Then, finally, he said it. Investing in family is always a smart move. There it was, the entire reason for the dinner. I didn't even hesitate. I looked him in the eye and asked, "Are you trying to mend fences, or are you looking for a bailout?" The room went silent. Eleanor's expression barely shifted, but there was a brief flicker of something in her eyes, a calculation. She was waiting to see how Richard would respond. At first, he played the role of the insulted father. He leaned back, sighed, acted as if I had deeply misread the situation. But then, just as quickly, he pivoted. Helping family is a sign of loyalty. I didn't let him continue. I don't mix personal relationships with business. There was nothing left to say after that. Eleanor's face hardened. The polite warmth disappeared in an instant. She didn't even try to cover it up. "I guess we were wrong about you after all." Sophie stood up before I could. "No, you weren't." And just like that, we walked out. After we walked out of that dinner, the shift was immediate. Sophie's parents dropped the fake kindness entirely. There were no more forced smiles, no more pretenses of family unity. Instead, the passive-aggressive comments started rolling in. Sophie's mother took the lead, sending carefully worded messages about how money changes people and how true family stands by each other in tough times. She never directly accused me of anything, but the implication was clear. In her mind, I was the problem, not because of anything I had done, but because I refused to be used. Nathan, as expected, made his own attempt at a public jab. He posted online about how some people think wealth means they can abandon family, throwing in a long-winded caption about loyalty, respect, and real values. It was the same old act, subtle enough to avoid direct confrontation, but obvious enough that anyone who knew the situation could see what he was doing. I ignored it. But then my business got dragged into it. A mutual business connection reached out. Apparently, Richard had been bad-mouthing me in professional circles, calling me untrustworthy and financially reckless. He was careful with his wording, never outright slandering me, but planting enough doubt that people might hesitate before working with me. What he didn't realize was that I had already been one step ahead. Instead of retaliating directly, I reached out to a shared investor, someone I knew had been considering a deal with Richard's firm. A quick conversation was all it took to confirm what I already suspected. Richard was in deeper financial trouble than he let on. He had been banking on new investments to stay afloat, and now, thanks to his own pettiness, I had the opportunity to quietly pull that safety net away. Not long after, that investor backed out of the deal. The fallout was immediate. Richard had been counting on that funding, and losing it sent his already struggling company further into crisis. He must have figured out what happened because the next thing we knew, Sophie got a call from him. This time there was no subtlety, no fake warmth, no pretending. He told her directly that if I refused to help the family, then she should reconsider our marriage. That was it. The final line had been crossed. Sophie didn't hesitate this time. She told him, if you cared about me, you wouldn't try to use my husband. And then she ended the call. After everything, the years of passive-aggressive remarks, the sudden shift when they learned about my financial success, the manipulation, the blatant attempt to secure a bailout, there was nothing left to salvage. They had never valued me as a person. They had only valued what they thought they could take from me. That night, Sophie and I made a decision. No more messages, no more explanations, no more attempts to justify ourselves. We were done. The next morning, Sophie's mother sent one last message. It was long, emotional, dramatic, claiming Sophie was choosing money over family and that she would regret this decision one day. Sophie read it, sighed, and deleted it without responding. I took it a step further. I blocked both Richard and Nathan permanently. No second chances, no opportunities for them to crawl back when they realized they had overplayed their hand. But Sophie hadn't blocked them yet, and later, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. A single message, if you ever grow up, you know where to find us. It was Richard. In the following days, the extended family divided. Some relatives reached out quietly, admitting that they understood why we had cut ties. Others, mostly the ones who still clung to Richard's influence, blamed me for tearing the family apart. Sophie's cousin, the same one who had been feeding us information, sent one last update. Richard was furious, not just because we had walked away, but because he had lost control. He was ranting to anyone who would listen, blaming me for ruining their reputation and turning Sophie against her own family. I didn't care. A few nights later, as we sat on our balcony watching the city lights, I looked at Sophie and said, "They never respected me. They only respected what they thought they could take from me." She didn't argue. She just nodded, because now she saw the truth too. A few weeks after we cut ties, a letter arrived. It was from a lawyer, Sophie's parents' lawyer. The language was formal, but the message was clear. They were considering legal action against me for defamation and financial interference. According to them, I had intentionally sabotaged Richard's business deals and caused harm to their family's reputation. I read the letter twice, then set it down and laughed. It was so ridiculous, so desperate that I almost didn't take it seriously. But when I looked at Sophie, she wasn't laughing. She wasn't scared, but she was tired. She knew her parents too well. They didn't care about winning, they just wanted to intimidate us into submission. I contacted my lawyer immediately. He read the letter, sighed, and reassured me that it was nothing more than an empty threat. There was no legal basis, no actual claim. It was just another manipulation tactic, hoping we would fold under pressure. His advice was simple: ignore it. If they actually filed something, we'd handle it then. A few days later, Sophie's mother made her final move. She sent Sophie one last message, long and dramatic, full of guilt-tripping and emotional manipulation. It was all about how Sophie had betrayed her family, how they had always loved her, how she was letting money destroy their bond. The entire message was designed to make her doubt herself, to make her believe she was the one at fault. Sophie didn't hesitate. She responded once, "You tried to manipulate us for money. We are done." Then she blocked both of them. Not long after, extended family started reaching out. Sophie's aunt, the one who had quietly enjoyed watching Richard get put in his place, now pleaded with her to meet them halfway. She claimed that, despite everything, family should come before pride. But Sophie stood firm. She wasn't the one who had walked away, her parents had. They had shown their true priorities, and she was done pretending otherwise. Then Nathan lost control. He called me, his voice full of barely contained rage. He didn't try to be subtle this time. He went straight for accusations. I had ruined their family. I had torn them apart. I had destroyed their father's business and their family's legacy. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I just asked one simple question: so, the only way to be accepted was to fund your father's mistakes? There was a pause. For the first time, he had no comeback. Then, without another word, the line went dead. Hours later, Richard made his final move. He posted online a long, bitter rant about how children today have no sense of family values, how the younger generation turns its back on tradition. He didn't name us, but it was obvious who he was talking about. He wanted sympathy. He wanted people to believe that he was the victim in all of this. Meanwhile, a mutual business contact sent me an update of their own. Richard was scrambling. After the investor backed out, he had been forced to seek funding elsewhere, but word had spread. He had lost credibility. Nobody wanted to take the risk. His company was sinking, and no amount of public complaining was going to change that. That same night, Sophie made her final decision. She sent one last message. "You showed us what we meant to you. Goodbye." Then she blocked them permanently, and just like that, it was over. For the first time in years, there was no more noise, no more manipulation, no more feeling like we had to prove ourselves to people who never truly valued us. We were finally free. 1 year later, life was completely different. Peaceful, free from the constant weight of Sophie's family. Without them lurking in the background, waiting for another opportunity to manipulate, Sophie and I thrived. Sophie threw herself into her career, and without the constant belittling and second-guessing from her parents, she excelled. She took on a leadership role, gained recognition in her field, and finally felt confident in her own abilities, something her family had always chipped away at. My business was stronger than ever. A few months after cutting ties, I secured a major deal, expanding into a new market. It was the kind of success that Richard and Nathan would have pretended to celebrate if they had still been in our lives, but only because they would have seen it as an opportunity to latch onto. Now, it was just mine. No strings attached. Then, out of nowhere, news of her family resurfaced. A distant relative, one of the few who had remained neutral throughout everything, casually mentioned that Richard's business was on the verge of collapse. It wasn't surprising. Losing investors had been the first blow, but apparently, things had only gotten worse since then. Bad decisions, desperate attempts to secure funding, and a damaged reputation had all caught up to him. Nathan wasn't doing much better. The same brother who had spent years mocking me for being a business owner, the one who had insisted real wealth came from corporate jobs, had lost his. His firm downsized, and he was one of the many let go. According to the relative, he was struggling to find a new position. Turns out, his last name and arrogance weren't enough to carry him. Then Sophie's mother made her final move, an email, long, emotional, filled with dramatic wording. It was the same act she had always put on, but this time, it wasn't just guilt, it was desperation. They were in financial ruin. She wanted to move past everything and start over as a family. Sophie didn't respond. She didn't even hesitate. She read it, then deleted it. No reply, no explanation, just gone. Days later, her cousin, the same one who had been feeding us information, sent one last update. Sophie's parents were now blaming her for cursing the family. Their downfall, in their minds, wasn't due to their own mistakes, greed, or manipulation. No, it was because their daughter had dared to stand up for herself. Then something even more unexpected happened, a wedding invitation from Nathan. At first it made no sense. After everything, why would he invite us? But then Sophie found out the real reason. His fiancée had insisted on it, unaware of the full extent of the family drama. It was clear Nathan hadn't been thrilled about it, but he likely agreed to keep up appearances. She had no idea what had actually happened, just that Nathan's side of the family had lost touch with Sophie and that it would be nice to bring everyone together again. I didn't even have to think about it. We're not going. Sophie didn't argue. She agreed instantly. We were done playing their game. Then came the last message from Nathan, "You'll regret cutting off your family when you need them one day." Sophie didn't respond. Just like with her mother's email, she deleted it. The real irony? We didn't need them. Not now, not ever. A week later, my family, who had always embraced Sophie as one of their own, threw us a surprise anniversary party. No hidden agendas, no guilt trips. Just love, support, and the kind of warmth that Sophie had never experienced from her own family. She looked around the room, taking it all in, and then, softly, she said, "They never really loved me. They just saw me as an extension of their status." She wasn't sad when she said it. She was just free. A notification popped up on Sophie's phone. At first, she ignored it, assuming it was nothing important, but then she saw the subject line. Her father had reached out to some private contacts, subtly hinting that financial assistance would be appreciated. While he didn't outright beg, it was clear he was hoping someone would step in to help. Some extended relatives quietly distanced themselves, realizing that the old money image was starting to crack. He claimed he was struggling due to family betrayal and that his own daughter had chosen money over love. The fundraiser had already been shared among extended family. Some had left supportive comments, but others weren't as convinced. People started questioning how someone from old money could suddenly need financial assistance. The cracks in their carefully constructed image were starting to show. Then Sophie saw Nathan's name in the comments. He wasn't just supporting the fundraiser, he was actively blaming her. His comments were bitter, accusing her of choosing an outsider over real family and throwing away loyalty for greed. He framed it like they had no choice but to ask for help because Sophie had abandoned them in their time of need. But what neither of them had expected was the backlash. People weren't buying the story. The comment section started turning against them. Strangers and even some extended relatives began calling them out. Some pointed out that a supposedly wealthy and powerful family shouldn't have been in this situation to begin with. Others outright criticized Richard for trying to guilt-trip his own daughter into paying for his failures. Then Sophie's cousin, the same one who had leaked family chat screenshots before, sent her one last message, more screenshots. This time, it was a conversation between Richard and Eleanor, bad-mouthing Sophie to anyone who would listen. They called her brainwashed by me, claimed I had turned her against them, and even suggested that she was no longer their daughter. Sophie didn't hesitate. She made a single statement to the extended family chat: "I will not be guilted into funding the same people who never respected me or my husband. This chapter is closed." The fallout was immediate. Nathan sent one last furious message calling her selfish and declaring that she was no longer welcome in the family. Sophie didn't respond. She didn't argue. She didn't justify anything. She just deleted the message. I looked at her and said, "You were never really welcome to begin with. They just wanted to control you." A few weeks passed, and the fundraiser quietly disappeared. It barely raised any money before being taken down. Word spread fast. Richard and Eleanor had spent years acting superior to everyone else, only to end up begging for money. Their reputation was in ruins. The social circle they once relied on for influence wanted nothing to do with them. Then came the final nail in the coffin. Richard's business officially shut down. Poor management, bad investments, and sheer arrogance had finally caught up to him. The man who once mocked me, who sneered at small business owners, had lost everything. Nathan wasn't faring much better. A mutual acquaintance casually mentioned that he had been couch surfing since losing his job. Apparently, he had burned so many bridges in his industry that no one was willing to hire him. He had spent his whole life looking down on others, assuming his last name would carry him. Now, that name meant nothing. Then, one night, Sophie's phone buzzed. An unknown number, a single message: "If you ever grow up, you know where to find us." It was Richard. Sophie stared at it for a few seconds, then deleted it without replying. That was it. The final thread had been cut. We spent that evening on our balcony, a bottle of wine between us, the city lights stretched out in front of us, and for the first time in a long time, there was nothing hanging over us. No manipulations, no guilt, no drama, just peace. We raised our glasses to a future where we were surrounded only by people who truly loved and respected us, not by those who only valued what they could take.